So here we are on a Monday night or a Tuesday morning rather, and at the aftermath of Ilya Topuria defeating Josh Emmett in a five-round main event for ESPN's Jacksonville UFC card. One thing is for certain is that Ilya Topuria has proven a couple of things. Number one, he's proven that he's an elite level fighter. Not only he's proven that he's an elite level fighter, he's also proven that he is a very popular fighter with a great clout behind him. He had a famous former football player by the name of Sergio Ramos. And by the way, when I mean football, for the American audience, I'm not talking about Tom Brady football or Lawrence Taylor football. I'm talking about Pele football, Erling Haaland football, Cristiano Ronaldo football, Messi football, and in this case, Spanish Sergio Ramos football. Okay? A former World Cup winner at that. One of the top defenders in all of soccer, and he came down to Jacksonville to support his quote-unquote fellow countryman, none other than Ilya Topuria. Now, that's not even the interesting part about the whole story, because, yes, it is true that Ilya Topuria is from Spain, but he also represents Georgia. And why is that significant? Well, this video is basically telling you why that is significant and why this has some implications on what his super fights are going to be. So 145, he does great. Now, what about him moving up to 155? Can he deal with the top level guys at 155 and possibly follow the footsteps of Conor McGregor and become a double champion? He has the tools and the list in terms of being a superstar, being European, having these famous guys that are backing him. The problem is that, well, there is no problem, isn't it? Because in the beginning, I thought that one of the biggest problems with an undefeated guy like this was how is he going to get all this clout? Well, lo and behold, the UFC is really trying to get their hands in Spain. And now they have a fighter that they can build around to make that happen. Also, you have this situation where he has this beef with Paddy Pimblett. And the interesting thing about that was a lot of their beef started online, and it eventually accumulated into one of the UFC London cards in which they got into a fight backstage during after some weigh-ins of some sort. It was the same card where Ilya Topuria and Paddy the Baddy were on the same card, and lo and behold, they come to blows because during Twitter and their little exchanges that they had going on online, Paddy the Baddy was saying things like, well, I can see why the Russians terrorized your people, and in reference to the other nationality of Ilya Topuria, which is Georgian, right? And so this was taken by serious offense to Ilya Topuria, in which he had no choice but to go and confront Paddy in the hotels of UFC London. And when he confronted him, this is when the famous phrase that Paddy the Baddy always talks about, oh, Mr. Hand Sanitizer. He always calls him Mr. Hand Sanitizer. And the reason why he calls him Hand Sanitizer, mate, is because he tried to attack him. And then after he tried to attack him, he threw a hand sanitizer at him. And so that's the reason why he calls him Mr. Hand Sanitizer. So here's the thing with Paddy, right? One of the biggest criticisms about Paddy is that he has the clout. He has the notoriety. He has the backing. The only issue is that, does he have the skill to fight at a higher level? And this is the reason why I think that this future super fight with Ilya Topuria and Paddy the Baddy is really intriguing, because let's face it, in the current moment of time right now in 2023, you could say that Paddy the Baddy is not really an elite level 155er, but you could say that Ilya Topuria is an elite level 145er. And there's something even in that if they were to fight right now, because Paddy may have the size, but Ilya Topuria has the skills. Paddy the Baddy may have an equal amount of experience as Ilya Topuria, but who has more of an elite level competition? Now, certainly you could say and cite that Paddy has never fought the likes of Josh Emmett, but in that case, you got to think to yourself, the type of beef that they have going on, I think it's going to be blockbuster. I also thought in the beginning that how in the world is Ilia Topuria ever going to have this notoriety and clout? This is one of those issues and problems that you have with undefeated fighters or guys that are coming in as prospects. One of the things that you always worry about. When Khabib was coming up, one of the things that people worried about was how is he going to become this pay-per-view star if he becomes a champion, because it was inevitable that he was eventually going to become a champion. The problem is, how would you market him? And lo and behold, we found out that he had a big Muslim fan base from the Middle East, not just in Dagestan and Russia, but also in America, also in Europe. And then on top of that, the Conor McGregor fight just catapulted him into a different stratosphere, which I think is the reason why this fight between Paddy the Baddy and Ilia Topuria needs to happen. But the problem is, should it happen now or should it happen later? Because eventually, these two guys are going to give each other the best clout that they can possibly give each other, right? You have Ilia Topuria, who's from Spain, has this backing from a soccer superstar who, by the way, flew him out after Jacksonville and into Miami and partied the night away to celebrate his victory. Now, just imagine the type of fans that Ilia Topuria is going to bring out of that. Right now, Ilia Topuria probably has 700,000 followers, all from Spain, of which the UFC has taken a notice. And then Paddy the Baddy, of course, comes from the English market, which, as you know, is a very big market that the UFC always tries to go after. Every year they have UFC London cards. They got a lot of UFC fighters from the UK. And not just because they're trying to recruit that particular part of the world, it's because it's an ever-growing talent that they've always stemmed from in terms of UFC recruiting. You can go back to the days of Lee Abraham Murray and see that that was the case, all the way down to Michael Bisping, and then all the way down to, let's say, John Hathaway, if for all the hardcore guys that remember back in those days. And then you have the likes of now, Leon Edwards, who's now the champion, right? Another guy who we always worried about, how is he going to become a champion when he doesn't really talk? He's not much of a talker. Well, guess what? He goes and performs that knockout against Kamaru Usman in the Salt Lake City card of last year, and he says some of the most epic lines that can only be forged out of his own situation and his own organic uprising, to which created this new superstar in a British champion. Now, obviously not the type of superstar that you would see in the likes of Conor McGregor or John Jones or anything like that, but a work in progress. Now, this brings me to Ilia Topuria and Paddy the Baddy. I think what they have going on here is very similar to a soccer hooligan type of crowd, right? And I remember when Conor first came into the UFC, seeing this YouTube video where this guy cited something along the line saying that, like, one of the things that the UFC is looking for is they're looking to do somewhat of a fan base that has this soccer like feeling to it, meaning that if you've ever been to a soccer game, there's a lot of people that always chant ole, 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 and then they're always cheering for their team. There's always a transnational, trans-international aspect to it, where these different countries come together and their supporters come together, or sometimes get into conflict, which generates a lot of interest in that aspect. But I think the future fight to make is with Paddy the Baddy Pimblett, and not only that, Ilia Topuria. Now, Ilia Topuria has proven that he is a top 145er, beating a guy who just came from an interim championship fight, and Paddy right now still has a long way to go. he still has to worry about Jared Gordon and rematching him, because a lot of people thought that he really won that fight. I'm talking about Jared Gordon. A lot of people thought that Jared Gordon won that fight. And Paddy the Baddy seems to have a lot of technical deficiencies that a lot of experts out there are citing. That's going to be a problem for him if he moves up in the upper echelons of the 155 division. But nonetheless, this is a super fight that is developing before our very eyes. Because as time goes on, eventually Paddy is going to evolve. Eventually Paddy is going to surprise us in some of the wins that he could get in the top 10 and maybe in the top 5. And then eventually, who knows, maybe Paddy could even become a 155 champion if for whatever reason or whatever crazy outcomes the universe brings to us. But it's more than likely that Ilia Topuria is going to be a 145 champion before Paddy becomes a 155 champion. But what is even more interesting than that, get this. Imagine Ilia Topuria has a Nate Diaz, Conor McGregor-like rivalry with Paddy the Baddy. Imagine if Ilia Topuria has that going on as a 145 champion. Because if you remember, when Conor McGregor became a 145 champion, guess what happened? He decided he wasn't going to defend that title. He was going to go for the double championship, which at the time was none other than RDA. RDA got injured, only for Nate Diaz to step in a couple of days' notice just not too long ago from his Michael Johnson fight. Okay, and then he even called out Conor McGregor and then gets his wish, then goes into the fight, knocks Conor McGregor down and chokes him out and becomes this ever-famous Nate Diaz that we know him to be today. Because guess what? Prior to the Conor McGregor fight in UFC 196 back in 2016, the way that we knew Nate Diaz was just nothing more than a mediocre fighter. And all of a sudden, he gets this big win against this big superstar, and then not only that, catapults the rivalry into a whole nother level, because then they go in and fight each other a couple of months later. And then, of course, never to fight each other again, and then going on for years and years on out, just talking crap to each other online and on the internet, and never really having a third matchup in the ways that a lot of people would have anticipated them to have. Or maybe they will in the future. Maybe they'll bring Nate Diaz back and do it. But nonetheless, this is the same trajectory that I see Ilia Topuria and Paddy the Baddy going on right now. Because yes, Paddy, just like Nate Diaz, had a following, right? But wasn't exactly the most skilled guy, had some deficiencies along the way, but because of his size, because of his experience, because of his submission skills, okay, it made him a formidable opponent for Conor McGregor at the time when he looked really unstoppable. So Ilia Topuria and Paddy the Baddy are no different in this aspect. The only difference is that they're not up there right now. But that's why I call this one of the best future fights that you have yet to see.